Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Today, I wanted to go through in a bit more detail our last message from Gwyn ap Nuith. Normally, we use our intuition, we sit with messages for a bit, we think about the images that were shown to us to knit together our understanding of a message. But this last message was so involved, there was so much imagery that I thought it would be worth going through it line by line and talking about the wider concepts that Gwyn brought up within it. So I'll just quickly read you the message back and then I'll go through it in a bit more detail. So our last message from Gwyn was this. I'm getting sucked into the ground again. This is me. Through the ground and along, digging a deep furrow into the earth and ploughing through as if I'm a tree being drawn through the earth, throwing up soil in every direction. I see the six-armed cross. What work do I need to do now? I see cotton growing in the fields. I hear Merlin's name. I hear the word care. I see a kestrel or a sparrowhawk. Kestrel, I think. A thread from my forehead goes into her. I can see through her eyes. I can see through all their eyes. I'm not shifting. I'm here and there at the same time. Ground swallows me up, and I am in and through and on, all at the same time. See through them, be them, soar, fly, fly and soar. And then my eyes were like fire, and I hear the words, I am born of battle and chaos, and the antlers grow on my head. Metaphorical and physical all at once. Gwyn is my father. Gwyn is me. Gwyn is God. Gwyn is a man. Real and not real all at once. My feet are standing on the ground and in the ground and dissolving into particles all at once. A whirlwind catches me, and in my mind I see a helix. I'm spun in a tornado of fire and matter. I am born of battle and chaos, chaos. And then I see the universe, and of chaos is born beauty. I see the planets. Do not fear chaos, for of chaos is born beauty, Gwyn says. All shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. And I recognize the words of Julian of Norwich. And the payment? The payment is tending the garden, tending my garden like a farm. A shepherd sees to his flock, spreading the acorns, watching out, helping. The spirit of the fleece is a green-lipped woman, both a tree and a person all at the same time, dark like an oak, but not dark at the same time. Bite. I am born of battle. I am not afraid. Be not afraid. One day you will ride with me. What a message. Incredible. I get goosebumps every single time I read it. So let's break it down and have a little look at what the layers of meaning are within this message from Gwyn ap Nuith. Because as we know, from the sort of culture that he comes from Bardic culture, from Brythonic culture, there is so many layers of meaning in the imagery, in the specific words that they choose. So it starts with I am getting sucked into the ground again, through the ground and along, digging a deep furrow into the earth and ploughing through as if I'm a tree being drawn through the earth, throwing up soil in every direction. Now, to me, this starting with being a tree very much has the of the association of being grounded, being rooted. You're being the rooted tree, and then you're being pulled from that secure place through soil being thrown everywhere, sort of uprooted like it made me think of a felled tree being dragged through the forest by horses. Like how they used to fell trees, and it's throwing up soil and it's digging a big deep furrow. And this really speaks to me of we're grounded, but we're being turned over and exposed. Our deep unconscious is being turned over and exposed as the soil is, and quite violently as well. You know, this image of soil being thrown up in the air. There's not much control going on there. It's quite chaotic. And but it made me think about the turning of the soil. And when a soil is turned over, and old ground is disturbed in logging, in felling, but even if you dig a hole in your garden, old and ancient seeds are exposed, long dormant plants that have been buried are exposed, and or even mycelium, and they start to sprout or germinate. Um, and they might not necessarily be things that you wanted there, you know, trees or plants you don't want in that particular place in your garden. But also, the earth is where we bury our dead and where we bury our secrets and where we plant our seeds. So, this whole image beginning with us being rooted, and he doesn't say we're being uprooted, but our roots are still in the ground, but we're being forcibly dragged out of our comfort, and everything we've buried, seeds we've planted long ago and forgotten about, but also things we've tried to hide are being churned up and brought to the surface. And I think that's a really important aspect of this message, that it's starting in this really difficult and chaotic place, which is how our times feel at the moment, don't they? And then I see a six-armed cross, and we went over this very briefly in the last video. So please pop back and have a look. I'll put a link somewhere up here. The six-armed cross is a connection and protection act done by our Weneds, which are sort of like Brythonic shamans. They're people in Welsh folkloric culture, like wise women, but they would work with energy, the sort of ancient energy workers, but they're very rooted and nature bound, like a shaman. But it's also the shape associated in ancient geometry and sacred numerology, with representing all time and space and therefore all possibilities. So we've got this image of chaos, and then we've got this image of protection and groundedness in nature, but of all time and space and all possibilities. And this will come up again later on. So then we see cotton growing. Now, cotton, I feel, the growing of it is a symbolism of something growing in us that develops into something that we can use to connect to other world. Because this cotton we see growing, we then see a thread next, and cotton is commonly used to make thread. So I think there's a clear link here in the imagery that we can see something building and growing and evolving that is then used to connect us to Otherworld later in the message. And we can use that to grow from the turmoil and something natural like the cotton into something that we have worked, like the thread. So this infers some sort of involvement from us. We've had some sort of input into what we've come across to make a connection that enables us to connect to Otherworld. So we're not passive observers in this process. But it's also, cotton is also associated with weaving fabric that we wear every day in our lives. And I think that everydayness, that ordinariness of it as well, is a really, really important aspect of what Gwyn is saying here. That yes, something has been brought up that some of us are able to process and use to connect to Otherworld, but that it's a very ordinary, everyday thing. And I think here he's sort of saying, you can all do this. So then we hear Merlin's name. Now, Merlin or Merthin is his original name. Um, Comes from is from the same sort of time frame and cultural group as Taliesin, Gwyn ap Nuith, King Arthur. And Merlin saw the past and the future all at once, which is very similar to what we were seeing with the six-armed cross imagery as well, all things in all time. But he also learned to speak to birds who were seen as messengers between heaven and earth. And we then see birds next in the message. So I think that's a key point of the element of Merlin being shown as well. He's the conduit. So the fact we then see birds, again, there's this inference that we are able to connect to Otherworld and we are able to speak the language, and all of us are. Merlin famously in the stories went mad from battle and he fled into the forest where he became a wild man and to recover. And crucially, we don't see Merlin in this vision at all that Gwyn gave us. We only hear his name. So he himself is not present, but merely what he represents. So there's symbolism here of gaining the wild sight of which obviously has been inferred in the last part of the message, of battle weariness, which I think we can all relate to at the moment with what's going on in the world. And remember, we've been told by Gwyn in our other recent messages not to repeat mistakes of the past, and I've been told that as well personally. So I think that's also an important part of why Merlin is being shown to us, because it resulted in him going mad. And but also that element of him retreating into nature to recover his sanity is a lovely parallel with a lot of what us are finding at the moment, that actually going into the woods and going out in nature is helping us find our balance again. And immediately after this, we hear the word care, which I think is really important because he's layering up this image of everyday abilities to talk to Otherworld with that link with nature and how that is an act of self-care. But also the way he says care is almost like an instruction as well. And we'll come back to this later on in the message. He then moves on to showing me becoming the bird that we have joined with the thread. So we see the birds and then we see through their eyes, all of their eyes, not one at a time. We're not becoming a single bird. We're seeing everything at once, which again links back to this all space and time, all possibilities concept that he's introduced earlier on in the message. And we've got lots and lots of layers in this bird element here. You know, we've got the imagery of the bird themselves. We've had Merlin communicating with the birds. So there's a clear link between us and the birds. And birds, of course, are famously the messengers between heaven and earth because they can go between the two. But also we've got hawk imagery here, where we see the kestrel and the sparrow, or a sparrow hawk, we're not sure. And, you know, Horus is linked to the sparrowhawk. He's god of the sky, he's god of kingship, he's god of protection, amongst other things. So we've got this this sort of sovereignty element coming in, but also a protective thing. Obviously, you've got the link to Isis, the winged goddess. And again, she is the goddess of protection and motherhood and magic and healing and fertility. So again, possibilities and abundance. And Hathor as well, who is also represented with hawk imagery and sparrowhawks and that sort of thing. And she is again representative of the sky and of motherhood and of the divine feminine and of joy as well. And I think that's a key element that runs through this message as well, of not being afraid and following the joy, even if it's just going for a walk in nature. Whatever you need to do to retain that link to your sanity and your stillness inside with everything that's going on. So the imagery of the birds that we have are of the divine feminine, of the divine mother, of protection, vigilance, sovereignty. So again, feeling secure in ourselves. We have a thread which links us from our soil and the plants growing within it with the cotton, and very earthbound, to then having this link to the threads of fate and the Norns. So there's lots of cultural references and visual references to possibilities and timelines and our capabilities and knowing our own strength and this sort of thing. And we're seeing through the eyes of these gods, the eyes of these messengers between heaven and earth. We're not becoming them, they are a conduit for us. And so we're leaving in this message our singular self-awareness, and we're seeing all the possibilities at once, but we're also feeling that those hawk gods are both representing us or representing an archetype to us, but also we're able to use them as a conduit to access something even higher. And then in the message, our eyes are like fire, and we hear the words, "I am born of battle and chaos," and the antlers grow on my head. Now, to me, this is always Gwyn really embodying himself, really making his presence felt when I feel the antlers appear on my head. This is how he appeared to me in the beginning of our relationship. And I know he's there. So the fact that he's done that through this message in the middle is he's very much speaking to me in a less abstract way at this point. As soon as I feel the antlers on my head, I know this is Gwyn ap Nuith speaking directly to us. And then he says, "I am born of battle and chaos." And he puts that in the first person as well. So we know this is Gwyn talking to us now about what he represents and where he comes from. And this is very much Gwyn literally talking about his life as a man. You know, if you read the stories in the Black Book of Carmarthen, the conversation with Gwyn ap Nuith, which is detailed in there, and the Gododin poem, which he reminded me of again recently, where the whole of the tribe ride out in great, heroic way and are all slaughtered, and it celebrates their individual lives, and it's very touching. I have a very different take on a conversation with a Gwyn ap Nuith, which I'm going to make another video about, because scholars tend to think that it is very much Gwyn embodying him as a psychopomp, and the fact that he can't possibly have seen all these people's deaths unless he was not alive. I think it's very, very different, and I think it's a poem of grief, a conversation of grief and lament and regret and lessons learned. So I'll do another video on that. That's for another day. But it's important because we've also had that nod to Merlin, haven't we? That we know battle sent him mad. And then Gwyn is talking about that he is from battle and chaos as well. So he's telling us that he's been through some really difficult times himself. And he is warning us against letting ourselves be overwhelmed by current events, I think, here as well. Letting ourselves not learn from the past and not maintain a distance between all the chaos that's going on in the world. But he's also talking to us about change. And not just through learning the lessons of the past, but also about more profound change. You know, we've had that image of the tree being dragged out of the ground and we're the tree. And he makes my eyes in the vision appear like fire. Now, that is exactly how Gwyn appeared to me in the beginning, as this great antlered silhouette with eyes of flame. So he's very much comparing himself and making a direct comparison between himself and what he's been through in his life and what we're experiencing in our lives at the moment. So is he showing us that we are like him, that we're passing a threshold where we're gaining something otherworldly about us? I thought when I started thinking about this section that there was probably a bit of a leap, but as I've gone through the rest of the message, I don't think it is. I think that one of the underlying messages of this message he's given us is that's exactly what's happening, and that we are becoming more aware of something that we're all capable of, which is speaking to otherworld, speaking to spirit, and becoming one. So then I say, which I'm obviously channeling at this point, Gwyn is my father, Gwyn is me, Gwyn is a god, Gwyn is a man. Now, I don't think that Gwyn is saying that he's this creator of all and he owns us. I don't think that's what he's saying at all. I think he's talking about what those things represent. So to me, a father, obviously you've got God referred to as the Father or the Holy Father or whatever, or representatives of him. So there could be that he's saying he's a representative of the divine. I think that's very likely. But I think he's also talking about what your father represents. So your ancestors, your roots, your source, your origin. And then he says, Gwyn is me. So what he showed us just before was that he was making a direct link between his lived experience and our lived experience. And he's doing it again here. When he shows us Gwyn is me, he's talking about what we're experiencing right now, both inside of ourselves and in the chaos that's in the world. He's been through it before. And then he says Gwyn is a god. Well, what is a god? It's something vast and powerful outside of yourself. But it's maybe also our egos, right? You know, if you get a bit carried away and a bit arrogant, you know, it's referred to as sort of godlike and this sort of thing. So again, there's multiple meanings in the images and the feelings he's giving us here. And then he says Gwyn is a man. So what's that? That's humanity, right? That's our embodied physical humanity. So he's talking here about our source, our origins, our ancestors lived experience, his lived experience, him being a conduit for the divine. Then he's relating that to us. So again, he's saying we are a conduit for the divine. He's then also saying that we are something vast and powerful outside of ourselves as well, but to not get carried away, to not let that go into ego. And then he's rooting it and bringing it all back to our physical form, our container. Um, and so there's this sense of there's a lot going on for us. It's all going on for us, and it can be really overwhelming. But he's also really grounding us and saying, you are all these things. He's sort of saying to us, you don't really realize how powerful you are and what you're capable of. Um, and in all times and space as well, because the father is the past. Gwyn is me, is the present. God is all encompassing. And then man is, I guess, the future, our humanity as a race as well. So again, we come back to this image of the six-armed cross and all possibilities in all time and space, and us being this immense being of possibilities. And that brings up this image of a creator, of us creating. And I think that's very interesting because he comes back to that later in the message, the same concept of human souls being much more powerful creators than we realize. So then he brings up fire again, and he brings it up in the form of a helix, which we associate obviously with DNA. Then he turns it into a tornado of fire. So these are symbols of repatterning. Helix obviously is a structure of DNA, but also we see it in the natural world with sort of whirly shells and plants climbing and things like this. And the universe has these sort of helix-like structures at a quantum level. Hubble telescope has taken pictures of the edges of the universe, and there's a lot of the study of antimatter and this sort of thing has brought up these images that are of the actual building blocks of the universe being these helix-shaped clouds of matter, particle matter. So by showing us the helix, he's really bringing together, again, really visually for us, human DNA and the construction of the universe, and them being part and parcel of the same thing. And then he brings it up a tornado of fire. So this is big, huge, immeasurable change and destruction. But it's not destruction for destruction's sake. Nothing will be destroyed in the sense that you can't destroy matter, right? And he's just shown us the universe and matter. And fire burns away. But what happens after a forest fire? It clears space for new growth. In fact, many cultures have controlled fire in order to encourage new growth. So I don't think this image of destruction is something to be feared. I think it's, again, it's a possibility. It's a clearing of space to make way for something else. And so this change will be permanent, but it's a deep transformation to a new whole that he's talking about here. And then he shows us our feet standing on the ground and dissolving into particles. And he says again, I am born of battle and chaos. And then he shows us the universe. So again, he's making this link between the humanity dissolving into matter and us being simply part of the universe, simply part of all that. He's almost making our physical form seem impermanent and unimportant, I'd say. as well. Um, he's taking us back to our literal essence, being made of stardust, literally. He's taking us back right to the beginning, to creation imagery, to the Big Bang, to the beginning of time, to the beginning of the universe. Um, and that again feeds back to his six-armed cross that he showed us in the beginning, because that's the diagrammical equivalent of the word in Genesis. It's it's the great vibration that creates all at the same time. And so he's very much really hammering it home that we are part of that. We are not separate from that in any way. And then he says to us, do not fear chaos, for of chaos is born beauty. Now, he's very clear to communicate here of chaos not being wanton destruction, because he's shown us the universe. Is that not the most beautiful thing with all those stars and planets and that sort of thing? So he's showing us chaos as a pattern breaker, not as a destroyer. And he talked to us in a previous message about a sloughing of the skin, of this shedding and removing of this heavy, unnecessary baggage in order to cut through more efficiently to our potential growth and benefit. And I think that's what he's saying here, is that the beauty that's going to be born of this chaos is our growth. But this period we're going through now that feels crazy and chaotic is the dissolution. This is the worst bit, It's the dissolution of self, it's the dissolution of societal norms, and it can feel frightening because our ego doesn't want to let go. It wants to control the process, and it can't, and it mustn't, because if you predict the direction of travel of your life, you're going to miss important segues, you're going to miss important elements of it. You're going to be focusing on the end and not the journey. And it could be argued that that was equally, if not more important, the journey. But also, if you focus on what's happening at the moment, you might panic or feel fear. And it's really important to not feel fear. And Gwyn, reiterates that here, do not be afraid. Because if you feel afraid, your whole vibration, your whole body becomes very low and very small and very negative. And I'll use the words that Gwyn's used before. It's corrosive to the soul. And that's not what we're here for. We're here to nurture our souls. We're here to grow. We're here to experience all sorts of different things and see the joy in all of those things and see the worth in all of those experiences. So Gwyn's encouraging us not to panic and not to control and not to go into fear, but to let go and to trust and accept that all shall be well, as he says immediately after this. And that this is a process of dissolving and shedding to grow into what our souls are capable of. We are remembering. And he's showing us the universe here, such a great analogy for our whole beautiful world and what is possible if we just let things destroy themselves, or, and just say, okay, where are we going next? And he's reminding us that we're all born of this primordial destructive chaos, and it's glorious. And so he's sort of saying here, to make an omelette, you got to break some eggs and it'll be okay. And then he does say it will be okay. He says, all shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. And this is a very, very famous quote by Julian of Norwich. And I think it's really nice that he's referenced Julian of Norwich here because it brings in, there's lots of imagery here of kind of universal destruction and chaos and primordial, growth, and that we are nothing but matter and all this sort of thing. But then he brings in this image of tenderness, of care, as he's mentioned before. He's reassuring us here. He knows what's happening in the world and to us as individuals, and that it's difficult and it's disconcerting, but he's saying it's going to be okay. And you need to understand that the context in which Julian of Norwich said these words that he has quoted. So she was a medieval woman who isolated herself as a hermit and lived in a nunnery in Norwich, in a single room. You can go there today to her tiny little cell, and she would communicate. She would write, and people would come and see her and give her food. And she lived through a period of plague and social collapse, but she wrote books about the strength and power of the feminine. She wrote incredibly empowering literature, which was not only really unusual for a woman of the time, but also the nature of what she was writing was incredibly unusual for a woman of the time. And she talks about love holding the universe together. And she teaches us that even while everything seems to be falling apart, nothing is lost. And I think it's really interesting that Gwyn, chose to reassure us with a quote from another woman who was a real cheerleader for women. And I think that's a really deeply touching element of this message, that he's used Julian of Norwich as a reference point. And I highly recommend you go and read a book about her, or even go and visit her cell, her hermitage in Norwich. So then he talks about the payment is tending the garden. So the payment for all this experience and this growth of our souls is tending the garden. Now, this obviously has connotations to the Garden of Eden. I mean, you can't say garden in this context in Western Christian countries without some making you think of the Garden of Eden. But how we think about the Garden of Eden is, I think, nowadays is very different from the modern, I say modern, the King James Bible interpretation of the Garden of Eden, where it's merely like a sort of holding pen for Adam and Eve, and then they're chucked out of it, and they were sort of well looked after there, but they messed it all up. I don't think that fits with how we understand the narrative of the Garden of Eden now. I think we very much see it, especially now with climate change and things. We understand the Garden of Eden as a nature gift before technology began to drive the world. And Gwyn has likened us to mushrooms before. He's talked to us about us being the fruit of something much larger that are all connected, which fits in with this message, with this sort of idea of the mycelium and us all being one. And is Gwyn saying here that he's helping us to grow, but he also looks after the earth, or something more abstract like the living field of growth, which we are all part of, that human mycelium that he's referenced before. And this sort of leads me to another thought I had the other day, another message I had the other day, which was about the hill that the research on non-verbal autistic children has shown that they are psychically meeting up in this place they call the hill, which isn't a physical place. They're meeting up in some other place of time and space on this thing called the hill. And that made me think of, you know, Gwyn's imagery of this living field of growth that we're able to move about in, but we must also look after it. Is the garden not just the earth, but also the possibilities, the all time and space that he's talking about as well? The living field of growth. I like that. I like that that phrase that he's put in my mind. But also the image that he talks about of tending the garden leads us to the act of gardening, to being a gardener. And that's gardening is a thing that makes the land and the self come together in order for them both to flourish. It's incredibly good for you. It calms your immune system, it calms your nervous system. People who garden live longer and have less heart attacks. And so it's not just the garden that blooms. And I think here he's very much leading us into this idea of sustaining ourselves through an act of renewing the source of life. And I think this is a very powerful image that he gives us here of our purpose. But it's interesting here that he uses the word payment. Payment for what? Is he saying that we're supposed to be looking after Earth as payment for being incarnated on it? Is he saying we have a symbiotic relationship with the planet itself and that we're stewards of it? Is he saying that we're buying a service? We're paying to be here by agreeing to look after the energy field, for want of a better word. Is it like a soul development service? But the payment isn't material, it's care. Or maybe care and developing care for all is part of the soul development. I think, knowing Gwyn, he probably means all those things at the same time. And then he says that well, he doesn't say whether it's him or us. He just says, tending my garden like a farm. So he's previously said Gwyn is God as part of his earlier message. And then he says, tending my garden like a farm. So he's put this image of, the divine garden, of creation being this divine garden. But then he likens it to a farm. And, you could panic here and go all dystopian, but I don't think that's where he's going with it. I feel that he's sort of, what does a farm do? A farm produces sustenance for you and for others in its simplest form. It implies our actions and his actions, because he doesn't say he's tending a garden like the farm or we are. He just says tending my garden like a farm. So he's talking about everybody, including himself. And it implies that our actions and his actions to live in a way with nature, knowing ourselves in our truest form, in our truest essence, without fear, actually sustains and therefore supports not only ourselves, but also others. And that puts in my mind this sort of infinity loop symbol, where in order to live well, we need to live as one and all care for each other. And in doing so, we support the further care and existence of others. It's almost like he's bringing in this element that we're sort of self-sustaining if we buy into living our true form, living our true essence, and understanding that we're all the same, we're all capable of amazing things, and we care for one another. Um, and again, he brings in this element of care here next when he talks about a shepherd seeing to his flock. Again, that's like a nurturing, nourishing thing, protective. And he's talked about being a shepherd before for descendants of the Old North. But here he's inferring not just protection and guidance to make sure we're going in the right direction, like a shepherd driving the sheep, but also he doesn't say he is here specifically. He says a shepherd. He gives us an image of. So I think he's also speaking to us as individuals to take responsibility as well, to protect and care for others and make sure they're going in the right direction. That is being true to themselves, which I think is rather nice. And then he says, spreading acorns, which is interesting because that immediately made me think, from tiny acorns, great oaks grow. And that's from a saying from Chaucer. And the saying is, as an ook cometh from a little spreer. So as an oak comes from a little sprout or a little sapling. And it means that powerful or significant things can develop from very small and humble beginnings. And obviously it's a natural process. Now, Chaucer wrote this in 1374, and it's from a poem he wrote called Troilus and Cressida. And I think this is important because the poem Troilus and Cressida, well, Gwyn loves poetry, right? Loves it. It's part of his being. It's the culture he's from, bardic culture. But this particular poem, Chaucer had a very dirty and funny sense of humor as well, which reminds me of Gwyn as well, because he can be very funny as well. But this poem, Troilus and Cressida, has an underlying theme of trust destroyed by conflict and division, which I think is rather poignant in our current world circumstances, isn't it? And crucially, this poem that Gwyn leads us to doesn't have a resolution. And it's not by accident that Gwyn chooses to use this phrase, because his own love story from Colwick and Olwen, talks about who he loves. Now, I've got to try and pronounce her name. Craithelad. I'm not great at Welsh. Craithelad. Similarly ends with no clear resolution, and he's doomed forever to fight his rival on May Day for her hand until the end of time. And I've always read her name in my mind as Cressida. So that's really interesting, because he's brought me to a poem about oaks sprouting, significant things sprouting from humble beginnings, but he's led me to a poem about love being broken and destroyed by war and betrayal, with no resolution, that has a name that I always mispronounce or misthink his lover's name as, which also has no resolution. So he's making clear links here. This isn't by accident. he knows this about me. He knows I always get create the lad in my mind as Cressida. Um, and so here, talking about spreading acorns, yes, he's talking about sowing seeds of potential, however humble they might seem, just, make lots of possibilities, create, create, create. But he's also warning of the folly of allowing ourselves to be divided, especially by conflict, and eroding trust in our intuition and each other, eroding love, else we'll fall into this endless cycle that cannot be resolved, as he found himself in with Craterland. So, from little acorns, mighty oaks might grow, but I think it's important that he's making an analogy about the potential follies on our life journey, and also, for our lineage and our legacy and our family lines and our children and our futures. Because ultimately, a tree will grow from the acorn. That's the future, right? And, Gwyn is the guardian of those family lines. And so he's asking us to help him help us by being aware of the damage that division does to our futures. So then he says he doesn't say he's watching out, he just says watching out. So again, he's talking about us and him. He's talking about like a partnership here of all of us watching out. Now, this made me think of the watchers, obviously, like guardian angels, the watchers of the north, the watchers of the south and east and west, which are in astrological terms archangels, or their Persian royal stars as well, which are again themes of sovereignty and kingship and protection. But when I think of the Watchers, I think of guardianship without intervention, which Gwyn has expressed before as part of his role, that he can guide, he can help, but he cannot divert. We still have free will, which is why knowing ourselves and listening to our intuition and what our soul advises is so important, because the reason the Otherworld gives us all these convoluted images and visions and poems is because they can't tell us explicitly, because it would impact our free will. And that is against the basic rules of the universe and the laws by which we exist. So the next bit, he talks about the spirit of the fleece. Now, ancient Greece, this obviously made me think of the Golden Fleece, Jason and the Argonauts. Ancient Greece has been coming up loads for me recently in messages. I've been hearing ancient Greek words that I have no idea what they are, and I've been having to Google them. So obviously there's some real repeat or fold in time to ancient civilizations, specifically ancient Greece, which is interesting because ancient Greece was a patriarchal society. The women, whilst revered as goddesses, and there was lots of sculptures of women, actual real women in ancient Greece were sort of pretty much confined to the house. It was very, especially if they were married, it was very rare for them to, be able to do anything of any consequence. So it's interesting that that's been coming up, because obviously, a patriarchal society falling has many echoes of what's happening today. Now, if you go to my Substack, you'll see that all those references to ancient Greece that have been coming up recently, but specifically the story of the Golden Fleece with Jason and the Argonauts, which he talks about here. He says the spirit of the fleece. So the Golden Fleece, you probably already know, Jason and the Argonauts were on their ship, the Argo. They're searching for the legendary golden fleece that would restore Jason to the throne. Um, but it's also like like it's like the story of the search for the Holy Grail. It's an epic journey, of which the journey is more important in a sense. It's very much like the Philosopher's Stone, not the Harry Potter version, the Holy Grail. So it's a narrative that includes a really ultimate prize at the end, but of which the journey is equally important. And these are known as quest narratives in literature. And they speak to us of this ultimate prize being achieved. And on this journey to get to the ultimate prize, we must face our deepest fears. We must use our highest wit. We must discover our hidden qualities. But more than this, the goal is of acquiring some ancient knowledge or powers, some magical thing. And so the fleece itself is a symbol of a living and renewing source of life and legitimacy and magical powers. And it's a thing that makes the land and the self and everything flourish. It's the thing that can make everything better. And stories like the Golden Fleece speak to us of a much deeper meaning of the soul's journey. And Gwyn specifically talks about the spirit of it. So the spirit of the fleece. So that's the essence of it, isn't it? It's not the physical thing. It's the essence. So the meaning, if you like, what he's saying is the meaning of life, really, the meaning of your soul's quest to the ultimate end is, and then he says, a green-lipped woman, a green woman, both a tree and a person, all at the same time. So the green woman, the green man are one of the oldest archetypes in Europe. And he repeats this, so he doesn't want us to miss this part, that the meaning of life is this green-lipped woman. Now, this archetype of the green woman, she's the soul of the land. She's the life force of living nature. She's the queen of the fae, of the fair folk. She's fecund, she's abundant. She's the very essence of the living world. And the way he says she's a tree and a person, he's really giving us the image of a dryad here. And a dryad is the spirit guardian of a tree, an elemental. So, but he's not just talking about a green woman, an elemental woman that is the living nature of the land. He's also talking about her having green lips. So lips to me say, he doesn't say mouth, which implies, I think, consumption and all sorts of things. He says lips. So lips to me say speech, which leads on to prophecy and oath and persuasion and songs and spells. But also links in maybe to what he says next in a bit, which is bite. Because we sort of need them to grasp our food, don't we? And so oaths and being sealed with a kiss and to eat and drink, and I think that links in to the fae because of their, if you eat and drink what's offered by the fae, you're then beholden to them and this sort of thing. So he's saying that this green-lipped woman is communicating something to us. Her words are alive. They are nature. They're magic encoded. So we kind of got to, he's saying that the meaning of life is the living force of nature and what she's trying to communicate to us. So perhaps that's our path of understanding. And he describes her as being dark like an oak, but not dark at the same time. Now, this comes only a few lines after Gwyn has said that part of the payment is spreading the acorns. So then he's talking about this green woman of being like an oak. So is she what grows from the potential that we spread? Do we create the future of living nature, of creation, of possibilities ourselves by spreading the acorns and nurturing them as this gardener? Are we creating our future? Is this what he's saying? Now, the oak's a sacred tree of kingship and druids. Yggdrasil was the tree of life for the Vikings, which was said to be an oak, ash in some lore, but also an oak. It's the king of trees, the sovereign of the wood. And again, we've got that sovereignty element coming back into the message. Oaks often end up standing alone in fields while the trees around them have died years ago because they're so long living. And it's said oaks live 1,500 years. They have 500 years growing, 500 years living, and 500 years dying. And Gwyn says she's dark like an oak. And there's an old Somerset rhyme. Well, we have it in some of the other, in Dorset and places like that as well. And it says, elm he do grieve, oak he do hate, willow he do walk if you travels late. So do we assume here that he's saying that the dark here is hate? I don't think so. I think that just comes from the fact that oaks drop their boughs quite a lot, and that would take you out. So it's probably where it got a reputation of sort of this malicious dropper of boughs and taking people out. But I don't think this is where he's going with this, because he says dark like an oak, but not dark at the same time. So he's not saying that the essence of our soul journey, of this living nature, is bad or harmful. I think the darkness he's talking about is more like this primordial void, dark like an oak. It's like, their bark darkens as they get older, doesn't it? So it's like this deep, ancient, powerful sovereignty planted in the land as deeply as it is in the sky, because the oak famously has roots as wide as its canopy, so it looks as it does above as it does below. And this is why they represent the tree of life, as above, so below, so within, so without. Their wood can be quite dark in color, but I think Gwyn is using their ancient folkloric darkness to represent this primordial place of all possibilities again. And this green woman is both the creator and the created and us. And is he, with a reference to acorns, is he also sort of saying she's the creator of souls? But then he's linking her back to us. So is he sort of trying to tell us that we're creating our own reality and our own future? It's really massive concepts to grapple with in this message. And then he says bite. Now, this is interesting because it could be misconstrued as sort of violent or threatening, couldn't it, in a way? But in Celtic myths, often the fae or goddesses require some exchange. They might offer a drink or food. They might demand a kiss or a vow in order to gain knowledge or protection. And Gwyn's just brought to our attention this green woman and the sovereignty of the land and her lips. And now he asks us to bite. He's likened her to us. So to me, this is an offer of initiation. This is because once you eat food offered by the Fae, and he's likened her to a dryad, once you engage with that, you rejoin your true nature. You're you're making a bargain with them, making a link to them. And I think this is an invitation when he says bite. He wants us to take his hand and fly with him without knowing where we're going, to understand the power of our true nature and become one with it. And then he says, I am born of battle. I am not afraid. Be not afraid. Now, what is battle? It's a struggle to become something, to exist, in some cases, just to stay alive. He's hinting at his role as a warrior protector here, but he's also saying what he's come through before, you know, all this dreadful things he's been through before that might be quite traumatic, and he's not afraid, and we shouldn't be either. If he can be not afraid after everything he's been through, then so can we. And then he ends the message with, one day you will ride with me. Now, Gwyn's riding is associated with the wild hunt, to gather up souls and help them on their way to the light. But Gwyn also helps living souls on their journey to learn and evolve. That's how he's here with us, giving us messages and helping us understand about the nature of reality. And Gwyn may be an ancient being, but he is what we refer to as an ascended master. He just chose to remain on the ground, helping out. It's where he's happiest. It's what he knows. He prefers it this way. And the way this was said, one day you will ride with me, was said very firmly, so surely, with such a surety that it's to me, this is a promise. It sounded like a promise of spiritual maturity. It's a reassurance, I think, that one day we'll all be able to move confidently through our soul journey. He's saying, you've got this. And through this process, you'll be equal to me. You're all equal. You'll be unafraid and in peace and helping others who are not. And so when we understand that Gwyn is a psychopomp and a guide between worlds for all souls, we understand that Gwyn is guiding us in this vision of a journey of complete and deep transformation in this message, from being planted in our place, from our starting point as a tree, which also he links to the green woman. So again, he's making all these comparisons between human souls and the living field of nature being the same thing. So he's taking us on this journey from being rooted, but being moved, churning up through hidden depths, through all possibilities of time and space. He's speaking of staying rooted whilst traveling immeasurably far. He's showing us the threads that come from ourselves, that connect us to things outside of our physical selves and beyond our current understanding. He's telling us about old identities and how they're dissolving, and that we're in a creative process, and that it may feel fiery and perhaps too fast, and that we may be desperately trying to hold on, but that we mustn't, and that the process is both necessary and not to be feared. We need to make the space in our lives and in the collective field to bring in the new. The forest can't grow without the fire coming through first. And that power that he's talking about doesn't come from domination. It comes from care. He tells us that nature, the old magic, the land is communicating with us through this rebirth process. It's showing us that we are part of it, and it's inviting us to return home to ourselves. He invites you to remember that your soul and the soul of the land are one, as within, so without. And not only is there one, but you are creating it. What you are feeling in your heart is creating what you're seeing and experiencing beyond it. He's saying we are stewards of our own journeys, of our own existence and experience, and of each other. And the soul must be tended like a garden to bloom and create the better future. Gwyn tells us in this message that our soul seeks, what our soul seeks, is not an object at all, but a journey of sovereignty, to understand the relationship between all things and our soul's place as a fully integrated part of it. We must trust and we must let go of our expectations and the knowledge of the destination, and instead ride the wave of possibilities, following our heart and our soul's calling, and understanding that that is the true path of the soul and the very nature of creation itself.